Jericho stepped off the shuttle, squinting at the odd glow of the Aurealis outpost. The atmosphere shimmered like liquid stardust, illuminated in an artificial silvery blue hue. Nestled on an isolated, barren rock far from bustling trade routes in the remote Andromas sector, the outpost was a relic of forgotten expeditions. It was compact, utilitarian, and slightly weathered, but it exuded a peculiar charm, an old research base standing stubbornly against the vast, indifferent cosmos. But it wasn't the station that caught Jericho's attention. It was a reception. There, standing side by side, were two figures who looked as if they'd been carved from moonlight itself. Their metallic silver bodysuits hugged their flawless, symmetrical forms, accentuating their lithe frames. They were twins, their long, deep auburn hair cascading down their backs in perfect waves, framed by their luminous, emerald-green eyes that gleamed like embers. Their faces, strikingly identical, featured high cheekbones, sculpted jaws, and expressions both inviting and enigmatic. "You must be Jericho," said the one on the left, her voice resonant and warm, as rich as aged honey. "Welcome," added the other, the words soft and inviting, a smile curving her lips. "I'm Isla, and this is my sister, Nyra." Jericho smiled back, feeling a rush of excitement. "I guess I am, though I didn't expect such a royal welcome." Nyra's eyes sparkled, her voice playful. "You're special, Jericho. Not many make it out this far. You're the first human we've seen in years." Jericho's curiosity piqued. "Years? That's got to get lonely." "We manage," Isla replied, shrugging gracefully. "But human company? That's an entirely different kind of welcome." The way they looked at him stirred something deep in Jericho's chest, a mix of intrigue and something else, something he couldn't quite name. He had spent enough time on crowded space stations and listened to the exaggerated stories of travelers to know when he was being charmed, but this was different. They didn't just see him as an outsider. They seemed almost fascinated. Over the next few days, Jericho settled into the rhythm of Aurealis. The station was bustling with automated drones, whirring machines, and a lush greenhouse full of strange plants from distant worlds. Yet, the only living beings he ever saw were Isla and Nyra, twins who claimed to be part of a long-term project for the Zephyrian Science Authority. They were studying solar anomalies, they said, but when Jericho prodded for details, their answers were always vague, accompanied by a knowing look and a shift in conversation. Not that Jericho minded. The food was good, the company irresistible, and he had no urgent plans to leave. Isla and Nyra were compelling in ways that went beyond their striking beauty. They would linger over his stories, laugh at his jokes, and ask questions about Earth, about music, human art, and most intriguingly, about love. "Humans are so spontaneous," Isla said one evening as they shared a meal. Her eyes locked on him, shining with unspoken curiosity. "You follow your feelings even when it doesn't make sense." Jericho laughed, leaning back with his own forkful of something spicy. "That's one way to put it." Nyra, sitting across from him, leaned forward, her amber eyes fixed on his face. "It's not a bad thing, though. It's refreshing. We Zephyrians are taught to act with reason, to resist emotion. But sometimes I wonder if we're missing out." The word love slipped from Isla's lips with an air of nostalgia that set Jericho's pulse racing. "Like love?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light. Isla's smile deepened, their eyes now serious, studying him. "Exactly." The conversation made Jericho squirm in his seat, an unfamiliar heat rising in his chest. He was under scrutiny, but it was a scrutiny laced with warmth, curiosity, and an unspoken promise. As the days turned into nights, Jericho began to realize that the twins were no ordinary scientists. They weren't just interested in him as a subject of study. They were interested in him. The way they watched him when they thought he wasn't looking, the subtle brush of their hands as they passed him a tool, the way they hovered just a little too close. It was more than a scientific interest, and it felt intentional. One evening, as the outpost's artificial lights dimmed to a deep indigo, Jericho leaned back in his chair by the observation deck, watching the nebula outside ripple like a cosmic dance. Isla and Nyra joined him shortly after, carrying a bottle of amber liquid that shimmered with a strange light. A celebration, Isla said, eyes bright, as she poured the mysterious spirit into 3 glasses. What's the occasion? Jericho asked, his smile teasing. Us, Nyra said, raising her glass, eyes meeting his. And you? The 3 glasses clinked together, their chimes melodic and strange. The twins' fascination with him wasn't subtle, and he didn't mind. He found himself smiling more, laughing louder, leaning into their attentions. But what Jericho didn't know was that their interest was far from innocent. Their people, the Zephyrians, were facing an existential crisis. Reproduction was faltering, their genetic line dwindling. And Jericho, with his unique human DNA, was not just a guest. He was a rare and coveted answer to their problem. But as the days turned into weeks, an unexpected shift occurred. Isla and Nyra realized they were not just drawn to Jericho for what he could offer their species. No, they were drawn to him for who he was, his humor, the warmth of his gaze, the way he saw them as more than just a matching pair. And that was dangerous, because in the end, they didn't just want to keep their race alive. They wanted him, and they were willing to make him theirs, no matter what it took. Jericho spent the following days navigating the fine line between camaraderie and something more intense. The twins were everywhere, their presence a constant, electrifying hum. At first, he thought it was the isolation of the outpost that made them so attentive, so uniquely interested. But as the days passed, it became clear that they were acting with purpose. And that purpose was him. The evenings were the hardest, when they would gather in the observation deck, sitting close, their laughter and whispered comments echoing in the silence of the room. Jericho couldn't help but feel as if he were in the center of a story that was no longer his own. Their questions about Earth had turned to deeper, more personal inquiries about family, romance, and dreams. They spoke of warmth and the uncharted realms of human emotions, as if they were something mystical, like treasure in an uncharted world. One night, after a particularly long day of fixing an irrigation issue in the greenhouse, Isla found him standing at the control panel, wiping sweat from his brow. The station's soft lights cast long, golden hues across her skin, making her look like a creature of the stars. "You've been working too hard," she said, a playful smile curving her lips. She moved closer, the metallic sheen of her suit catching the light as she stepped into his space. Jericho tilted his head, a grin forming despite his exhaustion. "You know, I'm beginning to think you two were trying to wear me out." Nyra appeared behind them, her expression serene, but with a glint of mischief. "We can't have our guest exhausted, Jericho. You'll need all your strength for what comes next." Jericho's smile faltered slightly. "What comes next?" Isla met his eyes, her gaze serious now, the warmth of her voice deepening. "Us, Jericho. All of us." Jericho blinked, trying to decipher her words. "What do you mean?" Nyra's voice drifted in like a whisper. "It's time you understood why you're really here." The tension in the room thickened. Jericho took a step back, suddenly aware of the beat of his heart against his ribs. "I'm here to help with your research, right? To understand more about Earth. And—" "No," Isla interrupted softly, reaching out to touch his arm. Her hand was warm, almost feverish. "You're here to help us survive?" Jericho's chest clenched as if a vice had been tightened around his heart. "Survive? What are you talking about?" Nyra's face softened, her eyes meeting his in a rare moment of vulnerability. "We are on the brink of extinction, Jericho. Our species is dying. The genetic compatibility between your kind and ours is rare, but essential. You're more than just a guest. You are the hope of the Zephyrians." The revelation hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Jericho felt as if the floor had been ripped out from under him. He stumbled back, but Isla caught him, steadying him with a strength that surprised him. "But why me?" Jericho managed, the question slipping out before he could stop it. "There must be other humans." "No," Nyra said, her voice resolute. "Only you. The connection we've formed, the way you respond to us. We've never experienced anything like it before. And we're not just talking about our biology, Jericho. We need you, your spirit, your uniqueness. Isla's fingers tightened around his arm. "We've been watching you, learning from you. And we don't just want your genetics. We want you as part of our future." Jericho felt a pulse of fear and something else. Something he couldn't name. He looked at them, the twins who had become more than strangers. There was no doubt they were stunning, mesmerizing even. But they were also vulnerable. Two beings who had spent years cut off from the rest of their world, clinging to hope and the promise of something more. "You're not just an experiment, Jericho," Isla whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the truth. "You're our chance at survival. And our future." The room was silent for a moment that stretched infinitely. Jericho's mind spun, grasping for clarity as the weight of their words settled into his bones. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. His life was no longer just his own. Nyra stepped forward, her eyes locked on his. "We've planned everything. From this moment on, you'll be part of our world, part of our future. We just need you to accept that." Jericho's pulse quickened as he considered the stakes. The urge to run, to escape this revelation, battled against the pull he felt toward them. It was impossible to ignore, something intangible that he couldn't deny, something that drew him to them like the gravitational force of a star. He met Isla and Nyra's eyes and saw the hope, the fear, and the determination. They weren't asking him to be a part of this. They were telling him he already was. "I don't know what to say," Jericho whispered, the room feeling colder despite the artificial warmth around him. Isla's eyes shone as she took his hand in hers. "Say yes, Jericho, because in our world, saying no isn't an option." The pressure in his chest grew, sharp and crystalline, as he let their truth sink in. This was no longer just a research mission or a chance encounter. This was destiny, and whether he was ready or not, Jericho knew his answer. The following morning, Jericho woke to the muted sounds of the station's automated systems humming softly. The pale, blue glow of the outpost's artificial lights filtered through the narrow window of his quarters, casting the room in a serene, ghostly shade. He pushed himself up from the narrow cot, rubbing the sleep from his eyes as he tried to come to grips with the weight of the previous night's revelation. The twins had laid bare their truth, and now it was lodged in his mind, relentless and consuming. He hadn't slept well, restless dreams mingling images of deep space with the sharp, glowing eyes of Isla and Nyra. They had spoken of their need, their desires, and their future, a future that now seemed so intertwined with his own, even though he couldn't begin to understand how he fit into it all. The door chime cut through his thoughts. "Come in," he said, his voice rough. The door slid open, and there stood Isla, her auburn hair spilling over her shoulders, eyes sharp and knowing. She entered without hesitation, moving gracefully, the slight shimmer of her silver bodysuit catching the light. Jericho swallowed as she approached, the space between them shrinking until there was nothing left but the air that seemed charged with electricity. "I know it's a lot to take in," Isla said, her voice soft. "But we need to move forward. Time isn't on our side." He looked at her, her expression filled with urgency and hope. His mouth opened, but he found no words that could explain how he felt. Conflicted, exhilarated, frightened. She reached out and touched his cheek, a simple gesture that sent a shiver down his spine. "Do you trust us?" she asked. Jericho took a deep breath, searching her eyes for answers. He saw the desperation there, the silent plea. He nodded. "I do." A small smile curved her lips, and in that moment, it felt like a promise, a tether tying him to the unknown. "Good," she whispered. The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. Jericho worked alongside Isla and Nyra as they prepared for the next stage of their mission. Their tasks had an air of excitement, an urgency that buzzed in the corners of the station like a hidden current. He was no stranger to high-stakes operations, but the stakes here were something more personal, more profound. The twins were no longer just mysterious scientists. They were the embodiment of survival. And now, so was he. They led him to the main research chamber, a room that seemed to pulse with life, walls covered in a web of glowing blue data streams, holographic charts of star patterns and genetic sequences suspended midair. It was a place where science met something almost magical, and Jericho felt as though he had stepped into another world. Isla stood at one of the consoles, her fingers dancing over the controls as holographic data spun into existence. Jericho, we need to prepare you for the process. It's not invasive, but it requires your full cooperation. Nyra stepped beside him, her expression unreadable, but her eyes kind. This is our last chance, Jericho. The results of this will determine our future. A sudden realization hit him. This is what you've been waiting for, isn't it? You brought me here for this? Yes, Nyra said, not an ounce of hesitation in her voice. But not just for what you can give us genetically. We brought you here because we need you. Because we see you. Isla's voice cut through the tension. We don't just want to survive. We want to live, Jericho. And we want you to be a part of that. He met their eyes, seeing their unyielding resolve, their fear and hope so intertwined it was almost tangible. He didn't know what his role was going to be in this strange dance of survival and connection, but for the first time, he felt that he belonged somewhere. It was as if they had cracked open a part of him that he hadn't even known was sealed shut. Tell me what I need to do, he said, the steadiness in his voice surprising even himself. Isla reached out, her hand resting on his arm as she guided him toward the center of the chamber. A soft hum vibrated beneath his feet, resonating through his bones as the room seemed to come alive, lights shifting and pooling around them. A set of chairs with sleek, metallic frames and padded seats emerged from the floor with a gentle hiss. Nyra glanced at him with a small, reassuring smile. Relax, Jericho. This will be unlike anything you've ever experienced. Before he could say anything, the air around them seemed to thrum with energy. The holographic charts began to move faster, spinning into complex sequences that he couldn't hope to understand. The twins stood close, their hands now clasped in front of them, eyes locked on him with a blend of anticipation and a shared, almost unspoken understanding. Isla's fingers touched a set of symbols on the control panel, and Jericho felt a sudden, electrifying pulse run through his body. His vision blurred, the colors of the room blurring together like a painting being smudged. He gasped, but the sensation wasn't painful. It was exhilarating, as if he were merging with something larger, something ancient. It's starting, Isla said, her voice a mere echo as the world around him changed. Jericho's thoughts spiraled, but they were soon replaced with an unexpected warmth that spread through him, settling into his bones. His body tingled, alive in a way that no human experience had ever made him feel. A deep sense of connection thrummed in his chest, and he knew, in that instant, that whatever came next, it would bind him to Isla and Nyra in a way he could never have imagined. They were doing more than just securing their future. They were claiming him, and he was ready to let them. It was only the beginning. The sensation ebbed and flowed through Jericho, a current that refused to be ignored. It pulsed beneath his skin, warm and electric, like a heartbeat that was not his own. The holographic projections around him blurred into a whirl of light and motion, and he had the sensation of being both present and apart from himself. His body hummed, as though it had woken from a long slumber, each cell alive with an energy he'd never known existed. Jericho was dimly aware of Isla and Nyra standing close, their expressions etched with a mix of relief and awe. The pulse of energy surged one last time, a crescendo that left him breathless. And then, the room fell into silence. The lights dimmed, the data streams stilled, and the air was thick with something unspeakable. Jericho, Isla said, her voice soft but commanding. The warmth in her eyes was palpable. It's done. He staggered, the room spinning around him. Nyra moved to catch him, her touch grounding firm. For a moment, their eyes met, and Jericho saw something there that made his chest tighten, a mix of pride, fear, and hope. He reached out, steadying himself against her, and then realized that he no longer felt the fatigue that had clouded his body only moments before. He felt renewed, whole in a way he couldn't describe. "Are you okay?" Nyra asked, her voice tinged with a note of concern. Jericho exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping him. "I think I'm more than okay. He glanced down at his hands, flexing his fingers as if reacquainting himself with their movements. A faint, golden glow shimmered beneath his skin, as if he were coursing with stardust. "Good," Isla said, stepping forward. The blue of her eyes sparkled as she studied him, and a small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at her lips. "The procedure was successful. You're part of us now, Jericho. Not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally." He nodded, the weight of her words settling in. He was more than just a participant. He was now bound to their survival, their future. A feeling of camaraderie blossomed within him, strong and unyielding. He didn't know what had truly changed, but the connection was unmistakable, deeper than mere biology. Nyra broke the silence, her voice now lighter. "You should rest. It's going to take some time for the full effects to settle. You'll need to adapt." Jericho looked at the twins, the unwavering confidence in their expressions giving him a newfound sense of peace. "I can handle that," he said, a grin forming on his lips. "I think I'm going to like this new chapter." That night, Jericho lay in his cot, staring up at the gently pulsating ceiling light. The room was silent save for the soft hum of the station's life support system, a constant reminder that he was far from Earth. But there was no fear. Not anymore. With the twins nearby, he felt a strange sense of home. The door to his quarters slid open, and Isla entered, her presence commanding and serene. She held a small, glowing device in her hand, its light casting delicate patterns against her silver bodysuit. "Thought you might like some company," she said, moving to sit beside him. The light from the device illuminated her face, revealing a vulnerability that took him by surprise. Jericho shifted, sitting up to face her. "I thought you two were going to be busy with the station's maintenance protocols." Nyra appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with an amused smile. "We finished hours ago. We wanted to see how you were doing." Isla met Jericho's eyes, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There's more to this than just survival, Jericho. We chose you not only because you were essential, but because you embody the very thing we've been missing. Hope, love, connection." A warm flush spread across Jericho's chest. He reached out, taking her hand, and the golden glow from within spread outward, merging their touches. "So, what happens now?" Nyra's smile was soft but sharp. "Now we wait. We adjust. And we start thinking about the future, Jericho. Our future." The three of them sat in the quiet, the silence no longer tense, but filled with possibilities. The weight of the past few days settled into Jericho's heart like an anchor, holding him steady and secure. The twins were right. He was part of something bigger now, something that demanded courage, trust, and the willingness to face what came next. Jericho's heart swelled with an emotion he couldn't name, but knew would define him from this moment on. This was no longer a mission, no longer an experiment. This was home, and no matter how strange or impossible it might have seemed, he was ready for whatever came next. He squeezed Isla's hand, feeling the warmth seep into his very soul. The future was still unknown, but one thing was certain: together, they would face it. And for the first time, he didn't doubt that they would succeed. Morning arrived with a soft glow filtering through the station's translucent panels, casting a gentle light that seemed almost alive. Jericho rose from his cot and stretched, the muscles in his arms flexing with newfound strength. The hum of the station was a familiar comfort, the sound of automated systems working tirelessly. But today, it felt different, more alive, more promising. He dressed in a simple uniform provided by the station, the fabric lightweight but durable. The memories of the procedure last night, of Isla's touch and the electric pulse that had surged through him, were still vivid. It was as if he had been branded by the twins' essence, bound to them in a way that defied explanation. And as he caught his reflection in the polished surface of the mirror, he noted the subtle changes, the faint gold tinge to his eyes, the way his skin seemed to radiate a warm, inner glow. Jericho knew he was no longer just human. He was something more, something they needed. The soft knock at his door drew him from his thoughts. He looked up to see Isla standing there, her eyes meeting his. She was dressed in her silver bodysuit, But today, there was a new energy about her, a sense of hope. "Morning," she said, stepping inside. "Morning," Jericho replied, a smile tugging at his lips. "How's the station holding up?" She moved to the window, gazing out at the swirling nebula that painted the sky in deep purples and golds. "Better than expected. The genetic integration has begun to spread through us. We'll know in a few weeks if it's truly worked," but she paused, turning back to him. "We're optimistic." He nodded, unable to suppress the rush of pride that surged through him. He was part of this, part of their story. Nyra entered behind Isla, her presence always calm, but today there was a spark in her eyes. "We've been preparing something for you," she said, reaching into a compartment built into the wall. She pulled out a small device, one that looked familiar, but held an intricate design unlike anything Jericho had seen. The twins had called it a pack stone, a tool of ancient Giffon origin that they believed could seal their bond. "It's a tradition, a promise." Jericho took the stone, feeling its warmth seep into his skin. The sensation was soothing, almost like a heartbeat echoing in the depths of his chest. He glanced up at the twins, both watching him with expressions that spoke of both love and solemnity. "Is it what I think it is?" he asked, the weight of his realization pressing down on him. Isla stepped forward, her voice serious. "It's more than that, Jericho. It's a union, one that will tie us together forever, in every way possible." "Forever," he whispered. The word was like an anthem, resonating deep within his soul. He looked at Nyra, who nodded, a faint smile dancing on her lips. The bond that had grown between them was no longer just about survival. It was about trust, loyalty, and love. He realized then that he was not just a guest in their story. He was an essential part of their future. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady with conviction. Isla and Nyra approached him, their eyes full of emotion as they placed their hands over his, guiding the stone to his chest. The air around them buzzed, a low, melodic hum that seemed to vibrate from the stone itself. A surge of energy shot through Jericho, unlike anything he had felt before, and in that moment, he knew they were more than just three individuals. They were a unity, a bond that had been forged in the crucible of their shared destiny. When the light faded, the station seemed brighter, the colors of the nebula outside more vivid. The echoes of the ritual reverberated in Jericho's very being. He looked at the twins, and the understanding passed between them silently. The future was theirs to build, and they would face it together. "Now," Nyra said, breaking the silence, "we move forward. The station, our people, the Giffon race, everything depends on us." Jericho stepped forward, his voice strong and filled with a newfound sense of purpose. "Then let's make it count." The days that followed were filled with activity and anticipation. The station, once a forgotten outpost drifting in the dark reaches of the galaxy, now thrummed with the energy of hope. Jericho worked alongside Isla and Nyra, overseeing the fusion of their technology and his human insight, combining their strengths to craft solutions that had never been imagined before. They found ways to strengthen the genetic bond, testing methods that would ensure their survival and bring them closer to the future they so desperately needed. On one evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon of their artificial world, Jericho and the twins stood at the observation deck, watching the nebula shift and dance. The station's soft light reflected in the glow of their eyes, and Jericho felt that all of it, the struggles, the challenges, the changes, had led them to this moment. "What comes next?" he asked quietly, turning to the twins. Isla smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "Next, we rebuild. And with you here, Jericho, we know we can." A warmth enveloped them as they stood together, and Jericho realized that he had finally found what he had been searching for all his life. It wasn't just survival, it was belonging. He reached out, taking both of their hands in his, and together, they looked out at the vast expanse before them, a galaxy full of possibilities and a future built not alone, but together. And in that moment, Jericho knew that this was only the beginning. The dawn of tomorrow had come, and they would face it as one.